James Fallon was a PhD neuroscientist who studied the brain. In 2005, he was conducting a study involving the brain scans of serial killers, looking for patterns that he could correlate with their psychopathic tendencies. Some of those tendencies include an almost total lack of empathy or remorse, and exhibiting mostly total self-interest or egocentric traits. Psychopaths are primarily concerned with their own needs and ignore the needs of the community. In another study, Fallon was looking for patterns associated with Alzheimer's patients. Since his family was prone to Alzheimer's, Fallon had scans from many of his family members, including a scan of his own brain. At some point, while looking through the family scans, he noticed that one scan exhibited the same patterns as those of serial killers or psychopaths. He eventually looked to see who that particular scan belonged to and found that the psychopathic brain belonged to himself. He says he never killed or raped anyone, so he thought maybe his hypothesis about the brain patterns was wrong. But with further genetic testing, along with self-critical evaluation, it turned out he did, in fact, have all the high-risk traits, which included aggression, violence, and low empathy, all characteristics associated with psychopaths. He eventually accepted the fact that he was technically a psychopath, just a good kind, one labeled a pro-social psychopath. Pro-social behavior is behavior that benefits other people or society as a whole, such as helping, sharing, donating, cooperating, and volunteering. Psychopaths are simply one type of humans, and not all act on their most antisocial traits. In some ways, they represent one extreme of humanity. Humanity ranges from people who are totally selfish and uncaring to extremely selfless people who exhibit unconditional care and love for everyone and everything around them. Fallon had all the negative traits, but because of other factors, he chose to act on his more socially acceptable, caring, and loving personality traits. We all have that same ability to be more socially supportive and less selfish. But the questions are, do we choose to act on our self-interests or on the interests of the community? Do we choose to be pro-social? James Fallon symbolizes the fact that we absolutely can overcome our most basic selfish instincts when we choose to recognize them and then act accordingly, accepting the fact that we are part of a much larger community of life. In the long run, being completely selfish is harmful to life. Being empathetic, caring, and loving supports life, and trusting that others will do the same is crucial to the continuity of life as we know it. Taking care of ourselves while also supporting community requires balance, and sometimes we get off track. And trust, as it relates to our overall survival, is very important. It may even be a need for trust that prompted our ancestors to create God. Unfortunately, I believe our ancestors got off track and we're still suffering from the consequences. Azim Sharif is a social psychologist and professor at the University of British Columbia. What I'm about to share is from a transcript of a podcast I heard on the program Hidden Brain, where Sharif was a guest. This segment was in 2020, and it was entitled Creating God. Sharif said that if you look at the archaeological record prior to 12,000 years ago, and also at modern hunter-gatherer tribes who are remarkably similar to people from that earlier period, these societies lived in small groups, and they don't have challenges from anonymous strangers. That is, they know exactly who they can and can't trust in their communities. With these smaller communities, their gods tend to be smaller and weaker and less morally concerned. Large punitive gods only emerged when it was necessary for cooperation to spread because of larger settlements. A punitive god wasn't needed with these smaller societies. These smaller groups represent humanity for the vast history of our species. We lived in very small groups of about 50 people, never getting much larger than about 150 people. This also works for us from a genetic standpoint because we're only built to be able to cooperate with as many people as we can know well. So when strangers started showing up, the larger group began to encounter people whose reputation they weren't sure about. This allowed some of the strangers to get a free ride off of the group. The strangers were able to cheat the group with impunity. When you started having larger groups with cheaters in the group can't sustain itself. You need a level of cooperation between the people in larger groups in order for any community to work harmoniously. The agricultural revolution started about 12,000 years ago, and with it, we started forming larger settlements of people. Because of these larger groups, we needed something more than our genetic programming. We needed a cultural innovation to allow us to succeed in these larger groups. Professor Sharif and his fellow researchers believe the creation of religion was one of those cultural innovations. But there was one specific aspect of religion that was also needed, and that was the idea of a supernatural punisher, also known as God. Basically, if humans could be convinced that God was going to punish them if they didn't act in the line of the interest of the group, that belief would make them cooperate for the good of the group. We even see examples of this. There were large trade networks that existed in North Africa where people had no way of knowing each other. They were from opposite ends of the continent. And yet, because they had a common religion, such as Islam, they could trust that the other person was going to be a reliable trading partner. And so, just knowing that other people were God-fearing believers, just like they were, was sufficient to act as a cue for trust. According to Professor Sharif, that's how the concept of God came into being, so that people who didn't know each other could somehow trust each other. Creeds, which our own UU ancestors were unwilling to accept, was another way people could trust that someone else was an acceptable Christian. Historically, since our UU ancestors were unwilling to support the various creeds, they were deemed heretics, people untrustworthy. The first Unitarian, Michael Servetus, was burned at the stake for his heretical beliefs. He was totally untrustworthy, according to Calvin. After creating God, our ancient Judeo-Christian ancestors came up with a creation story, with their God as the main character. The written version of this story is found in Genesis, and here's just a small part of that story. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fishes of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In God's image he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them. God said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So, the story they came up with, and millions of people in our current world accept, says that man was created in God's image. But not just that. It also claims the entire world, all the animals and plants, are under the dominion and rule of man. And that's where we got off track. Instead of realizing we are just part of the world, we focused on our most selfish patriarchal traits and proclaimed man's dominance over everything. In effect, they created a God that supported and condoned our most selfish instincts. They created a God in our image, not the other way around. Now, here are some thoughts I believe support my opinion. I would imagine if a God gave us dominion over everything, he'd also give us some special powers to rule over everything, since we were, after all, created in his image. Sadly, we don't seem to have any special powers, save possibly one, which I will address later. In fact, we're subject to all the same forces that all the other living creatures are subject to, creatures that we supposedly have dominion over. And we're often negatively affected by other creatures. For example, there are bacteria that cause deadly infections, and given the opportunity, there are animals that would eat us instead of us eating them. We simply don't have any kind of superior relationship with the other creatures in this world, a world we're supposed to have dominion over. And we're also subject to all the forces of nature, just like all the other life on the planet. The volcanic explosions, the wildfires, and the tropical storms don't discriminate against anything in their paths, and they don't offer us any special protection, even though the earth was supposedly given to us to rule. And all life forms die. Some are born, procreate, and die in a few days or weeks, while others live for centuries before they die. Some experience illness and recover, while others die from those same illnesses. In the end, we all die regardless of how long we live. Like it or not, we are only a part of the interdependent web of life. We're nothing special, except maybe in our imaginations, which are indeed creative. So once again, I believe we created God in our own, often selfish image. And I also believe we likely created the concepts of good and evil. I say likely because I don't know. I have thoughts here too, but mostly I have a lot of questions. There's a saying, what's normal for the spider is chaos to the fly. I'd change that to say, what's good for the spider is evil to the fly. And when someone talks about evil, invariably Hitler comes up. Yes, he was truly horrible, and he killed millions of innocent people. But were our American ancestors any less horrible, and do we call any of them evil? Some of them gave smallpox-infected blankets to Native Americans, causing countless deaths. Other ancestors bought and sold slaves and condoned their kidnapping and many deaths on slave ships while they were transported here. Do we call them evil? We used those slaves to build a lot of America the Beautiful, but I'm guessing it doesn't look so beautiful to the people who suffered building it. Beauty might simply depend on your perspective. The web is profoundly beautiful to the spider, but to the fly, it's a horrible death trap. Yes, our wonderful US of A, land of the free and home of the brave, was created on the backs of slaves and caused the deaths of millions of Native Americans. So isn't it possible that what appears to be good to some is actually evil to others? And we seem to limit our ideas of good and evil to our own very limited human perspectives. Why haven't we labeled wholesale slaughter of millions of buffalo in the 1800s as evil? Or the overfishing to near extinction of many fish species as evil? Or the mass extinctions currently going on around the globe caused by humans as evil? Is something labeled good when it is to our benefit, like when we humans happen to be more like the spider? And is something labeled evil when it is harmful to us, or when we find ourselves in the position of the fly? In my opinion, the loss of perspective caused the problem in the first place. When our ancestors wrote down their belief that we were to dominate and rule over the world, unfortunately, that was a lie. We are just part of this world. We certainly don't rule over it, and we are subject to all the same forces all the other creatures are subject to. What we call evil, in my opinion, is often the result of someone expressing the most selfish aspects of their human nature, and other humans suffer or die because of it. Something James Fallon chose to control. But all is not lost. We often learn from our mistakes, and then creative and determined people work together to repair the damage we've caused, just like the wolves in My Time for All. We also prevented the buffalo from going extinct, and now they are plentiful. They will probably never roam the plains like they once did, but they are alive in great numbers, and they are thriving. It took a while to finally understand the problems associated with a pesticide we created called DDT and the resulting consequences for birds of prey. But once we did, we discontinued the use of DDT, and since then, eagles, hawks, and other birds of prey have rebounded and are no longer threatened. And when we discovered why our protective ozone layer was being destroyed and a hole had formed, we discontinued the use of chlorofluorocarbons around the world. Now, the ozone layer is repairing itself. So I know we humans can be incredibly creative and help right the wrongs we've caused. And that gives me hope. One aspect of the story in Genesis is about the creativity of God, demonstrated by all the stars in the sky and the vast assortment of plants and animals on earth. And it was that same creative God that we're supposed to be created in the image of. It's with the idea of creativity where I agree with the writers of Genesis. As a species, we are incredibly creative. Creative minds realized that dead viruses could be used to prompt an immune response in our own bodies, and vaccines were created. Millions of lives have been saved because of that creativity. Creative advances in agricultural sciences have led to more and better crops, which would have been unimaginable to our ancient ancestors. We now have enough food to feed the world if we only had the wherewithal to actually do it. Without a doubt, humanity has an amazing creative ability to solve problems and save lives. And humanity has the humility to fix problems we create, especially when we understand the consequences of our actions on the broader community of life. In general, I think we take our creativity for granted for so long that we've almost forgotten how creative we actually are. Our curiosity and creativity have allowed us to explore the deepest depths of our oceans and the highest reaches of our mountains, and it's taken us to the moon and beyond. And finally, that same creativity has allowed us to crack open and explore the very atoms that make up all of creation. We've also reached out through telescopes and mapped the extreme vastness of our known universe. Our creativity, imagination, and curiosity are simply unparalleled in the animal world around us. And we've also demonstrated how creative we are and that we can rise above our most selfish natures when we recognize our mistakes. So, in this respect, we do indeed resemble the creative spirit of the universe. Yes, I believe our ancestors created a God in our image, not the other way around. And then this God they created proclaimed, "We have dominion over all the earth," which gave us permission to abuse the earth with imagined impunity. That story is obviously false, and many no longer accept it as true and are coming around to the fact that we are only a part of the community of life on earth. But what I realized as I was writing this conclusion was that we also need to help our friends and loved ones who are afraid of strangers and don't trust them. We need to help them see that these strangers are beautiful creations of the universe, just like we are. We need to help them see that not all strangers are bad. Most, in fact, are trustworthy and are helping us to right the wrongs we're all responsible for. Yes, we're all a part of this interdependent web of life, an amazing creation of the divine spirit of the universe. Amen and namaste. Now,